Good day, everyone. Today we're going to be starting a new assignment that has to do with something called linear perspective. Linear perspective is a specific set of rules that allows you to create the illusion of depth in space. In other words, making things look three-dimensional. And this is something that you can do in a number of different ways. There's one-point perspective, which uses one point that they call the vanishing point. There's two-point perspective, the one that we're going to be dealing with for this set of drawings, and that uses two vanishing points. Then there's multi-point perspective that can use three or more different vanishing points. What we're going to start out with is going to be the very basics of how to create a set of simple objects in space using two vanishing points, so two-point perspective. And we're going to begin on a sheet of plain old computer paper, just regular old 8.5 by 11 paper. So we're going to flip the camera here downwards and start giving you instructions about how to begin and identifying some of the basic vocabulary in this type of assignment. So everybody, to begin, what we're going to start with is to find the roughly center of the two shorter sides of your paper. Now, as you see, we've got our paper turned horizontally, meaning the longest edges are right here along the top and bottom, and the shortest edges of the paper are on the left and the right hand sides. Now, we're going to be using a couple different tools as we're working today. You'll definitely want to have a pencil with a good eraser. If you don't have a good eraser, get yourself some sort of a eraser to use that's not attached to your pencil, obviously. This is a Staedtler brand eraser. They're personally my favorites. Here's a picture of what they would look like if they still had the skin on them, we'll say. We'll also need a ruler. You don't need a 18-inch ruler like this one. A simple, 12-inch ruler will work just fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to start out by placing our two vanishing points. So the vanishing points we're going to place on the shorter sides of the paper, and we're going to put them at, at the halfway point or somewhere near the halfway point. So we're using a piece of computer paper right now, and the computer paper is 8.5 inches along the short sides. So the first and most important step when you're using a ruler is if you want your measurements to be accurate, you need to make sure that the first line of your ruler, right here at near the bottom edge of the ruler, is lining up with the edge of your paper. If it's not, then you're not going to end up with the same measurements consistently. So I'm first lining up that bottom line of my ruler with the edge of my paper, and half of 8.5 is 4 1/4. So I'm going to go and look at the 4-inch mark, which is the longest line right next to the 4, and I'm going to go up by 1, 2, 3, 4 little marks. It'll actually be kind of a medium length mark. And we're just going to make a dot right at the edge of your paper at 4 1/4. This is our first vanishing point, and you can label that with a VP, just to remind yourself that that is the vanishing point. We're going to slide your ruler over to the opposite side of the paper, and we're going to do the same thing one more time. So again, we're making sure that our first line of the ruler lines up with the edge of the paper, and we're going to locate the 4-inch mark. So that is going to once again be the longest line right next to the 4 here. And we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 little teeny marks. Those are 16th inch marks, by the way. And when you get to that 4th mark after the 4-inch mark, that'll be your 1/4. You're going to make a teeny little dot and label that with a VP to remind yourself that that is vanishing point number 2. Now, remember that for two-point perspective, you must have two vanishing points. And an important rule to realize when you're working with two-point perspective, at least for the very basics, is that if it's not a straight up and down line, the line needs to go to the vanishing point. Now, there's things that we'll learn as we go into other assignments for two-point perspective that'll break that rule. But for the very basics, just remember, if it's not a vertical straight up and down line, it has to go to vanishing points. So we're going to put our ruler somewhere near the center of the paper, and we're going to draw a 2.5 to 3 inch long line. You don't have to measure this line. You just want to make sure that one end of it starts above your vanishing point and one end ends somewhere below your vanishing point. Now, by the way, when you're making a straight up and down line, it's important to make sure that it is actually straight up and down or as close to it as you can manage. And so one way that we can do this is by looking at the bottom of your ruler. So I'm going to scoot it up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. But if you look at the bottom of the ruler and you notice that you've got an uneven gap, so if you've got, a bigger gap on this side compared to this side, then you know your ruler is not straight up and down. So you're going to try to adjust that ruler so that you see a nice consistent gap all the way across. So if this gap and this gap look the same, then you know your straight up and down line is going to be either perfectly vertical or really close to it. Another trick you can use is if you are a little bit closer towards the sides of your paper and you're trying to make a straight up and down line, you can also look at this gap right here. And if you see that it's, bigger on one end and smaller on another, then you know that's not a straight up and down line. All right, so step number 2 is that we're going to draw a line that goes towards your right vanishing point from the top of that vertical line and from the bottom of that vertical line. So we're just going to go ahead and put my pencil tip right here at the top of this line. Now, my trick for keeping things always in the right place is to just leave my pencil there. I'm going to slide my ruler up to it, and I'm going to rotate my ruler until I get to my vanishing point, and then I'll go ahead and draw a line, and it doesn't really matter how long it is. I'm going to make it roughly 1.5 inches long, but you don't have to worry about an exact measurement. As long as this line is pointing towards your vanishing point, you're fine. You don't want to go all the way to the vanishing point, though. That would be too long. It'll get in our way, and you'll need to erase parts of it. So you've got your first line going to your right vanishing point from the top of that vertical line, and now you're going to go to the bottom of that vertical line and draw one more line that goes towards your vanishing point. And I'm trying to make them look like they're roughly the same in length. We're going to do the same thing now using our left vanishing point. So again, I'm going to put my pencil tip against the top of that line, that vertical line, and I'm going to adjust my ruler so that I'm lining up with the vanishing point, and then as soon as I'm in the right spot, I'll go ahead and draw it. Now, do your lines have to be exactly the same in length? No, it's fine if this one is longer than this one, or the reverse. It doesn't really matter to me. And now we're going to draw one more line that goes towards that left vanishing point, this time from the bottom of our vertical line. So again, I'm sliding my ruler, I'm leaving my pencil on the point where I want my line to start. I'm sliding my ruler up to it, rotating until I get to my vanishing point, and then drawing that line one more time. And I'm going to purposefully make this one go a little bit too long. I drew it a little bit lighter so it'd be easy to erase though. So the last thing we've got to do to finish off this first, it's going to be like a rectangular or a cube form. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a straight up and down line here and a straight up and down line right over here. So again, make sure that your line is actually going straight up and down. And so there's, again, 2 different ways we can do that. We can look at the gaps at the bottom of the ruler, or since we're closer to the edge of the paper, we can also look at that gap as well. And as soon as you've got it straight up and down, or as close to it as you can manage, you go ahead and draw one straight up and down line that touches to those 2 diagonals. Now, when we get to the other side, we do want a straight up and down line. We don't want our line to connect the ends of those 2 diagonals because that wouldn't be straight up and down. So we want a perfectly vertical line. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my ruler here so it feels like it's perfectly straight up and down. I'll double check against the bottom of the paper, and it looks like I have a pretty even gap there, and I have a pretty even gap all the way down right here. So I can go ahead and draw our second straight up and down or vertical line. And then all we have to do is just erase any of this that goes too far. So one thing that you're going to want to do, by the way, is to draw lightly, and that way, if you have something go too far, it's easy to erase. I have to draw a little bit darker for things to be totally visible on the recording, so forgive me if mine ends up looking a little bit darker. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw another rectangular or cube type form right over here and right over here, and we're going to start with that vertical line just like we did on this one. And I'm going to make the vertical lines line up with each other. So I'm going to draw the one for the form that'll be up here and the form that'll be down there. So I'm really carefully adjusting to make sure I've got an equal amount of space all the way down here so our line is not crooked. We do want it to be vertical, perfectly straight up and down. And as soon as I've got that looking good, I can go ahead and draw my line. I'm going to want it to be probably 1.5 inches away from the top of my paper. So you don't have to make any special measurements to ensure that that's the case. You just go ahead and make sure that you got some space up here. We're going to do the same thing down here at the bottom as well. All right, so now that we've got those 2 lines drawn, by the way, this one's a little bit shorter than this one. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't matter. We're going to do the same steps that we did for this object. The only difference is because our whole line here is above the height of the vanishing points, both lines are going to angle downwards as they go towards the vanishing points on the left and the vanishing points on the right. And by the way, the height of your vanishing points is also known as your eye level. And so on this first object that we drew, we're not really seeing the top surface of it or the bottom surface of it because the top is above our eye level and the bottom is below our eye level. That's going to be a little bit different when we're working on these two. On these two that we're going to start working on, you will see the bottom of this one because it's above your eye level, and we will see the top of this one because it's below your eye level. So let's go ahead and begin by drawing our two lines going towards our right and left vanishing points. By the way, does it matter whether you start with the right or with the left? No, it really doesn't. If you want to start with the left-hand side first, it's not a problem. As long as these two lines are aiming towards your vanishing point, you're okay. So I'm still using that same technique where I put my pencil tip on the location where I want the line to start, and then I'm sliding my ruler up to it and rotating it around until I get to my vanishing point and then drawing my line. So I've got our two lines that go to my left vanishing point, two lines that go to my right vanishing point. Next is going to be those two straight up and down lines, just like we did on that first object, but right over here. So again, it's important to have these lines being perfectly straight up and down. By the way, can you rotate your ruler so that you can see those lines a little bit better? Absolutely. So I'm just looking at the edge of my ruler, comparing it to the edge of my paper to verify that this line is going to be perfectly vertical. And then I can do the same thing right over here. So rotate your ruler, and for that matter, rotate your paper in any direction that is useful for you. I can't really rotate my paper when I'm working on a video demo because it's not very pleasant for the viewer to see the paper going in weird directions. But when you're working on your paper, feel free to rotate it in different directions, rotate your ruler however works for you. That's totally fine. So now we have got a left and a right side here. We got a left and a right side here, but because this one's above our eye level, in other words, above our vanishing points, we're going to see the underside of it too. Now, we can't go to the same vanishing point. So if we were on the left, we couldn't go to the left vanishing point. We got to go to the right vanishing point. And from the right-hand side, we got to go to the opposite side towards the left. And that way these lines cross over each other and create the underside. So I'm putting my pencil tip right here on this corner, and I'm sliding my ruler up to it. I'm rotating my ruler around until I get to that right vanishing point, since we're on the left side, and drawing that line. And then we'll just simply go over here to the right corner, slide my ruler up to my pencil, rotate until I get to the left vanishing point, and whenever those two lines cross over each other, that's the back bottom corner of the box, and then you can erase any excess line that you have. Now, as time goes on and you get better at drawing these, you're going to learn how long to make those lines. You'll be able to guesstimate it more easily and less frequently need to actually do any erasing. But I prefer to just make that happen on this piece because this is an example of how you would begin. So because you're new at it, yeah, you might have to do a little bit of erasing like I did right there. Now, the question is, how do we create the one that's below your eye level? Well, guess what? It's going to be exactly the same. In fact, if I just rotate this, you can see that, well, now it's on the bottom, right? So it's not any different. All we're going to do is we're just going to be making two lines that go towards one vanishing point and two that go towards the opposite vanishing point. And since I've been going to the right vanishing point first for all of this drawing so far, we're going to go ahead and go to the left vanishing point this time first, just to show you it doesn't matter at all. All right, so let's go ahead and make our first and second lines going from the top and bottom of that vertical line to your vanishing point, and now we're going to reverse that and go towards the right vanishing point. And just remember, flip your ruler around if you want to look at that last one you did. And that way you can make them similar in length without as much guesstimating. By the way, when you're using a ruler, kind of stretch your fingers across the center of the ruler. And make it so that you're really holding your pressure down evenly across the center. If you're holding your ruler like off on one end, well, it'll be stable when you're drawing it first, but as you get further towards this other side, it's more likely to move while you're working. So if you keep your pressure down in the center of the ruler at all times, it'll be less likely to move on you. All right, now that we're done with those two lines going to our left and towards our right vanishing points, we're going to cap those off with that straight up and down line going between them. So verify that your line is straight up and down by either comparing it to one that you've already done or by looking along the bottom of your ruler, or if you are near the edge of your paper, you could also compare it to the edge of the paper instead. So looking over here, I've got a nice consistent gap, so I'll know that this line, oops, I didn't quite make it long enough. That's the problem with having the ruler covering up the line you're working on, is you may not be able to see exactly where you're going as easily, and that's where rotating your ruler around kind of comes in handy. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and create the top of this box. We do have our left and our right side, just like we had on these other two objects. And to create the top of this box, we're going to do the same thing we did up here. We need to go from the right side towards the left and from the left side towards the right. You can start with whichever one you want. So I've got my pencil tip right here on the corner of the box on the right, lining my ruler up with it and aiming that ruler at my left vanishing point, and then just drawing that line and stopping wherever it feels appropriate. And then we can go ahead and go over to here to this left corner, slide my ruler up to it, rotate until I get to my vanishing point, and draw my line until I hit that other one that I just completed, and now erasing any excess if there is any. So we've now created our first, second, and third rectangular objects or cubes, depending on whether, the sides all look like they're the same size or not. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing the same thing right over here. So if you feel confident in your skills and you know that you will get it right, you are welcome just to go ahead and pause the video and work on that. If you would prefer to have me walk you step by step through the process, go ahead and keep watching and pause as necessary. So we're going to start with the same steps as before. We're going to make sure that our ruler is going straight up and down. We're going to draw a line about 1.5 inches, maybe more inches, 1.5 inches, 2 inches from the top and bottom of the paper. You can make these short lines, you can make these long lines. It doesn't really matter to me. So yep, this one can be a lot longer than this one, and that's fine. Now, one thing I want to point out is that if your lines are lower or higher, you may see less of the top or bottom. So if this line right here was down lower, then this underside is going to look skinnier. Same thing, if this side right here was up, or if this corner was up a little bit higher, you'd be seeing a kind of flatter appearance to the top. And that would not be wrong, it would be correct. It would just seem a little different from the way it looks in the demo video. All right, I'm going to start on the bottom this time. It doesn't matter, you can start on the top. So we got our two lines that are going to go towards our right vanishing point. And we're going to have two lines that go towards our left vanishing point. I'm moving a little quicker now. You've seen how I do this before, so I feel confident that you have the ability to do this on your own. And I'm going to make one side noticeably longer than the other side. It doesn't matter. And then going ahead and making this last line on the left. All right. And then we got to put our straight up and down lines here, same as before. And here I've got a couple of lines I can compare it to. I can compare it to the angle of this line. I can compare it to the angle of this line, the bottom of the paper, the side of the paper. You got a lot of different places where you can look to ensure that you've got a nice, perfectly vertical line. And then we'll do the same thing right over here on this side. We'll just make sure that our line is going straight up and down. In this case, I'm going to flip around my ruler. I think it'll make it easier if I can compare it to the edge of the paper. Just got to make sure I can see just a little hint of where the ends of those lines are over here. All right, so that looks nice and vertical. Let's draw our line. All right, and then we've just got to draw the top. So for the top here, we're just going to go from the left towards the right vanishing point, and then from the right corner towards the left vanishing point. Again, you need to make sure that these lines cross over each other as they go towards the vanishing point. Some people just make them random angles. They really do have to point towards the vanishing point, or it will not be correct. All right, now from my right corner towards my left vanishing point. Okay, now you will notice that because this line went up higher than this one, we do see that the top looks a little bit flatter compared to the top of the object that we see over here on the lower left. So that is fine. Remember, the amount of the top that you see or the bottom that you see will vary depending on the height that you've chosen or the length that you've chosen for that first corner. All right, now we're going to make our two lines that are going towards our vanishing points for the left and right sides of our last object. Okay, next is our straight up and down line to cap off the end of the object over here on the right and the end of the object over here on the left. Your last two lines are going to define the underside of this object. So from the left corner going towards the right, and from the right corner going towards the left. And as usual, just erase any part that goes farther than it needed to. All right, so this is the end of the first segment of this drawing. So you will be uploading this one for a grade if you're one of my students working in class. If you're not, then you can move on to the next video. And so if you are one of my students and you're watching this, you're just going to upload this picture to the 2-point perspective basic forms assignment. And then you're going to be playing the next video that you'll find the link for in the description. You'll also find that same video in the playlist as well. And that video is going to be showing you how to add additional details to this drawing. So I'm going to show you how to make an object that looks like it's stacked on top of this one, that pierces through a hole in the underside of this one, comes out from above, forms an archway, and ends on the top of that center object. I'm also going to show you how to draw things on the tops and sides of these things like holes or pools or windows and doors, openings. So you're going to learn how to use these basic skills that you've picked up in this video and use them in different ways to create a greater degree of complexity.